Morning. My name is Sarah Stuyvesant, and I get the honor of bringing the word to you this morning. And I have been really excited. I brought a tissue up because first service I didn't. And if you know me, I need tissues usually, so brought up there just in case. This morning we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 1, so if you want to grab a Bible, the pew Bible's in front of you. It is page 199. And you can kind of just keep it open on your lap throughout the service because I'm going to go in sections and read a little bit at a time and then talk about each little section. So 1 Samuel chapter 1. It's also going to be up on the screen. There was a man named Elkanah who lived in Ramah in the region of Zuph in the hill country of Ephraim. He was the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zuph of Ephraim. Elkanah had two wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah did not. Each year, Elkanah would travel to Shiloh to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of heaven's armies at the tabernacle. The priests of the Lord at that time were the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas. And this was so funny to me as we start this. I'm like, wow, what would a sermon be without a whole lot of names that are hard to pronounce? So I don't know, how close that was to the Hebrew original, but that's okay. So I just want to give you a little background as we get into 1 Samuel 1. We start off talking about Elkanah and his family line, which I love that the Bible includes those little family trees. It kind of shows that the person that was writing did their homework a little bit. It feels like it gives a little credence to what they're going to say. And it shows us that Elkanah was a faithful man. He would travel to Shiloh where the tabernacle was, and he would go there each year, present his sacrifices on behalf of his family. And just so you know, the climate of the culture at this time, this is happening right after the Promised Land has been divided into the tribes of Israel, and lots of military conquests have happened and finished. And this is during the time of the judges. Israel has had a lot of highs and lows, and mostly due to their disobedience, and so God had given them judges to rule the land, and they'd have peace for a little while, and they'd fall back into chaos when they couldn't, follow his way. And Judges 21:25 said, "In those days Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their eyes." And so that just kind of shows you what it was like. But on top of that, there were priests that there was corruption in the priesthood. So Eli was the priest, and his two sons were serving as priests underneath of him. And chapters 2, 3, and 4, if you have already read that, if you're following along with us with our bookmarks, you see that these men aren't just not doing their job well, they are actually doing against what God would want for the priesthood. Going so far as they were seducing young women who assisted at the entrance of the tabernacle. They were stealing meat from the sacrifices. I mean, it was just horrendous. And the NLT, it says that the sons of Eli were scoundrels who had no respect for the Lord or for their duties as priests. Scoundrels, I think, is a little light on how harsh it should have been. The ESV says that they were worthless men. That kind of shows you a little bit more. So this is what's happening at this time. And our account today is in this transition of Israel. So we've gone from, these judges who have tried, they've had peace, and then there wasn't. And the state of Israel is just kind of messy, and the leadership has been messy. And so we've seen, these people go from Abraham and God establishing his people and growing them and then bringing them into the promised land after, wilderness and giving them these laws to live by, and then just the chaos that has happened. And so now what we're going to see as we go into 1st and 2nd Samuel and beyond is that we're transitioning into this time of prophets and of kings. So picking up in verse 4, on the days Elkanah presented his sacrifice, he would give portions of the meat to Peninnah and each of her children. And though he loved Hannah, he would give her only one choice portion, because the Lord had given her no children. So Peninnah would taunt Hannah and make fun of her, because the Lord had kept her from having children. Year after year it was the same. Peninnah would taunt Hannah as they went to the tabernacle. Each time, Hannah would be reduced to tears and would not even eat. "Why are you crying, Hannah?" Elkanah would ask. "Why aren't you eating? Why be downhearted just because you have no children? You have me. Isn't that better than having 10 sons?" We're going to get to that statement. So enter our woman of the day, Hannah. And we're going to learn 4 things just from these couple verses about Hannah. Hannah is the first wife, the first of 2 wives. She is childless, which the scripture says is caused by the Lord. She is ridiculed, and she is full of sorrow. So the first one is that Hannah is the first wife of Elkanah. First wife, which means he had 2. Why? Because he's a dummy. Maybe not. But remember that in this time, that was very common to have multiple wives. And we can assume that he took on a second wife because Hannah couldn't have children, so therefore he didn't have heirs. But we have to remember, too, that the Bible can be both descriptive and prescriptive. Descriptive is going to tell us what happened. It's going to give us the facts and the story of what happened. But it also can be prescriptive. This is the law. This is what you should do. This is how you should live. This would fall in the descriptive, not the prescriptive. God did not approve this. And Elkanah chose to solve his wife's problem of barrenness on his own. Maybe it was because Hannah said, "Hey, I'm not having kids. Take another wife." Does this sound familiar? Abraham and Sarah, and then Jacob and Leah and Rachel and their 2 servants. And Hannah and Elkanah would have known these stories, and they would have known the destruction and the harm that caused, and still they were trying to solve this problem on their own, which just led to more discord and bitterness and envy. The second thing we know about Hannah is that she's childless. The scripture says that the Lord closed her womb or kept her from having children. We don't know why that is. It doesn't say why. And we can assume some things because of the way that this story ends up, but sometimes we don't know why God does what he does. It might sound that God was harsh or uncaring to Hannah, but we must remember that we are bound. We are bound by our limited understanding, and we are bound by time. We only see what is right in front of us, and we are biased by our own feelings. God sees from beginning to end. But we know that he is good, and he's always working things out for our good, but even more so for his glory. So number 3, we see that Hannah is full of sorrow. Hannah is grieving her barrenness, probably for many reasons. As a woman, she just wanted to be a mom. She just wanted to have kids. But also at that time, in this place, in history, and in this culture, being a mom was everything that your identity was wrapped up in. It was your value, it was your worth, it was your identity. When you had many sons, it was like you were a hero, because what were you providing for the country? You were providing laborers for the fields so that you could have wealth in your land. You were providing men that would go and serve in the military, so your land was protected, or you could go and, conquer other lands. So everything was wrapped up in that. But also, your children were your retirement plan. There was no nursing homes. There was no, plan B, any, extra nurses that would come in or whatever. Like, your family was where it stayed. When you grew old, your son would take care of you, take you into the home. And so without that, then what does she have? If her husband passes away, what does she have? And so we see that like in the story of Ruth with Naomi. She's lost because she says, my sons have died, my husband has died. Where do I go? And so she goes back home to live with her relatives. So having sons was very important. The fourth one is that Hannah is ridiculed. So the Hebrew word for Peninnah's aggravation of Hannah is a word picture that means to thunder or roar. So this wasn't just, little like side remarks, like it was coming full on. So I picture that Elkanah, they go down to Shiloh for the sacrifices, and I just picture Elkanah goes off and does, his manly things of taking care of the camels and whatever he needs to take care of when they get there. And then we have setting up the tents, Hannah and Peninnah. And I can just imagine like the constant nitpicking and just making fun. It just says ridiculing, and just year after year this is happening. It makes me think of like Cinderella and the evil stepmother and the stepsisters, like I'm sure that she had her kids, ridicule her as well. So then Elkanah comes back, and he is passing out food. So after they would give their sacrifice, they would have a portion that they would keep for their family, and they would have, their dinner. And so Elkanah, I can just picture this table, and he's doling out meat portions, and here's for Peninnah, and here's each of, her children, they each get. And then he comes to Hannah, and Hannah gets the filet mignon. And so I can imagine how, like, Hannah and Peninnah, how that must have, like, that tension, how that must have felt. Now, in NLT, it says that Hannah got the one choice portion of the meat. Many other translations would say that she got a double portion. And so this could mean double the food, but it also, the significance was that the double or the best portion was reserved for the firstborn son, because they would get the bulk of the inheritance. So think Jacob and Esau and that fight for that inheritance that they wanted. And so he is placing this favor on Hannah in front of everyone. Even though we know that Peninnah had a firstborn son, because it said that she had sons and daughters, he's still choosing Hannah. And obviously that doesn't help the rivalry there. And Hannah is so sorrowful with her lack and with, the aggravation against her that she just can't even eat. So Elkanah tries to encourage Hannah, and he just doesn't get it. He says, "You have me. Isn't that better than having 10 sons?" But no, his love isn't enough, and his love can't satisfy that deep longing that she has. So thankfully, though, instead of responding to Peninnah with her own aggravation, she responds, and she goes to the tabernacle to pray. So picking up in verse 9, it says, "Once after a sacrificial meal at Shiloh, Hannah got up and went to pray. Eli the priest was sitting at his customary place beside the entrance of the tabernacle. Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord. And she made this vow, 'O Lord of heaven's armies, if you will look upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, then I will give him back to you. He will be yours for his entire lifetime, and as a sign that he has been dedicated to the Lord, his hair will never be cut.' As she was praying to the Lord, Eli watched her. Seeing her lips moving but hearing no sound, he thought she had been drinking. 'Must you come here drunk?' he demanded. 'Throw away your wine.' 'Oh, no, sir,' she replied. 'I haven't been drinking wine or anything stronger, but I am very discouraged, and I was pouring out my heart to the Lord. Don't think I am a wicked woman, for I have been praying out of great anguish and sorrow.' 'In that case,' Eli said, 'go in peace. May the God of Israel grant the request you have asked of him.' 'Oh, thank you, sir,' she exclaimed. Then she went back and began to eat again, and she was no longer sad." That interaction is a little interesting to me because as Hannah is pouring out her heart to God and she's weeping and has like this sorrow, Eli thinks that she's drunk, which is kind of interesting for how wicked his sons are. And he's like pointing that out at her, like, "Go home, you can't, But it's interesting that God uses this exchange in such a beautiful way on behalf of Hannah when we look into it. By the way, Hannah's name means grace, which we see God pour out on her repeatedly. So despite all that Eli and his sons are doing wrong with the priesthood, God uses Eli to bless Hannah and to fulfill his plans for not just her, but all of Israel. God still allowed Eli to be the vessel of his blessing, which he promised when he set up the priesthood. Deuteronomy 10:8 says, At that time, the Lord set apart the tribe of Levi to carry the ark of the Lord's covenant and to stand before the Lord as his ministers and to pronounce blessings in his name. A blessing from the priest carried weight. It carried the weight of God's word behind it, not because of anything that the priest did, but because God was doing the blessing. Numbers 6:27 says, "Whenever Aaron and his sons bless the people of Israel in my name, I myself will bless them." So after Hannah prays and talks to Eli, she goes back and she can eat and she's no longer sad. So how has this interaction changed her? To understand that, we must look at Hannah's prayer. She's pouring her heart out to God, and she tells Eli that she was praying out of great anguish and sorrow. So Hannah's desperation led to submission. This prayer that we read is only 2 sentences long, but we can learn a lot from it. But first, before the prayer starts, there's something that we miss in our translation to English. The Hebrew language is so beautiful that it's often not a word-for-word easy translation, because the Hebrew has a lot of word pictures, and a word might mean this really like in-depth type of meaning. And so in verse 9, it says that Hannah got up. So at face value, that's a pretty simple understanding. She got up from where she was, but that's not what the only meaning was in Hebrew. And it doesn't mean just to stand up. It's a picture of Hannah standing and acting for herself. It is a picture of resolve and decisive action. This changes our view of her, that instead of getting up just with sorrow, with her head hanging and just holding her grief, she stands up and she is ready to act. She comes with resolve to not only confront the Lord about her grief, but to decidedly submit to him. And I wonder if God was looking at her like, finally, yes, like this is where, the change is going to happen. I have a little sign that I recently bought, and I put it on my windowsill, and it says, "Have you prayed about it?" And I bought this because recently, my kids and I, as we were talking, we would start to kind of grumble. Like if we had a complaint or something that was irritating or frustrating us, we would talk about it together, and then it just felt like this spiral of negativity. You know how negativity begets negativity sometimes, and you just start to go down that path. And we were starting to do that, and it seems like more and more recently, and I saw this sign, and so I bought it to put on our windowsill because I told them about that saying, "Have you prayed about it as much as you've talked about it?" Because sometimes we, talk the thing to death, and we haven't prayed about it, and we get so consumed with it, but we haven't taken it to the Lord. So I picture Hannah just living in this state of just sadness and depression. She can't eat, and nothing can satisfy her, not even her loving husband. And on top of that, she's got a really mean sister wife, and she's just lost. And then one day, she gets up. One day, she decides, enough is enough. I don't want to live in that anymore. And something has to change. So in her prayer, she starts with, "O Lord of heaven's armies." The cool thing about reading that is we get to see in the Bible, God has so many names. And sometimes he will tell someone in a story, this is what you should call me. And sometimes it'll be someone will come up with a name to try to capture who he is. And so this is the first time that O Lord of heaven's armies, that has been said in the Old Testament. It's also translated Lord Almighty, Lord of hosts, Lord of armies. And this just shows that Hannah recognized who God is. We have to remember that she's not that far removed from the times of Joshua and the walls of Jericho. She would have heard that as she was growing up. She's not that far from Gideon, who, there's thousands of soldiers, and God says, no, let's take it down to 300 because I'm going to do the work. She's heard these stories, and so she's proclaiming that of him, O Lord of heaven's armies. The next part says, "If you will look upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son." She told God about her sorrow. She didn't hold back her heart from God, and she was honest about her desire for a son. A better translation for look upon and answer my prayer is she asked God to remember her. But it's not just remember as like, will you call this to mind? Will you remember me? Will you think about me? It's another action word of like, will you remember and act on my behalf? So as she stands up and she says, I'm ready to act, God, will you act? The next part says, then I will give him back to you, and he will be yours for his entire lifetime. Hannah's not asking God to act on her behalf in a selfish way, though. She made a vow to dedicate her son back to God for a lifetime of service to him. And this isn't like when we dedicate our kids in the front of the church and we say, hey, I vow to you, God, that with the help of my church family, I'm going to raise my kids the best that I can, knowing the Lord. This is literally a vow of her giving her son back to God for complete service for his whole life. And the next part says, and as a sign that he has been dedicated to the Lord, his hair will never be cut. She's establishing and proving her vow by saying that he will take the Nazirite vow, which is found in number 6, if you want to read about that. Samson was a Nazirite, John the Baptist was a Nazirite, and it's this vow that is taken that says, I will do these certain things in order to serve God for my whole life. And so she's saying before, she doesn't even have a son yet, and she's saying, I vow that I'm going to give my son to you in this special service. So she's proving in this prayer that what has changed is not a result of the priest. It's not a result of any other person. It was a change in her heart. She decided to get up and act, but not for herself. She has released her desires to God and has decided that God is enough for her. She no longer wants a son for herself, but a son for God, dedicated to serve him in their nation. This change was years in the making. We don't know how many kids Peninnah had, but if Hannah was the first wife and she had no kids, and then Peninnah comes along and she has multiple kids, so we know that this is years that she has just grieved this. And so that change has taken a long time. But finally, when she laid down her desires to God, she was able to feel joy again. And when Eli proclaims the blessing over her, he uses the same form of to give that Hannah used in her prayer. And I love this, that she said, God, will you give me so that I can give you? And then when Eli comes along, and he didn't hear her prayer. He didn't hear anything that he said, but he says, may God give you what you requested. And so it's a confirmation from God, like, hey, I heard you. I heard your prayer, even though Eli didn't. And so it's confirmed to her that he was listening. So, and although Hannah didn't know that she would have a son yet, she was able to walk away with her head held high, knowing that the Lord of armies had heard her. God had prepared her heart as he prepared a nation. He wanted Hannah to have complete trust in his sovereignty and to put her faith and dependence on him, because she would have a son that would change Israel's history. If we know already what Samuel would become, he's going to become one of the nation's major prophets. He's going to crown Israel's first king and be an advisor to him. And he goes on and he gets to anoint a shepherd boy who would become Israel's greatest king, in line and in preparation for the Messiah. So continuing in verse 19. The entire family got up early the next morning. Now this got up is just got up. It's not quite the same action, but they got up early, and they went to worship the Lord once more. Then they returned home to Ramah. When Elkanah slept with Hannah, the Lord remembered her plea, and in due time she gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, for she said, I asked the Lord for him. And Samuel can also mean heard by God or God has heard. The next year, Elkanah and his family went on their annual trip to offer a sacrifice to the Lord and to keep his vow. But Hannah did not go. She told her husband, wait until the boy is weaned. Then I will take him to the tabernacle and leave him there with the Lord permanently. Whatever you think is best, Elkanah agreed. Stay here for now, and may the Lord help you keep your promise. So she stayed home and nursed the boy until he was weaned. When the child was weaned, Hannah took him to the tabernacle in Shiloh. They brought along a 3-year-old bull for the sacrifice and a basket of flour and some wine. After sacrificing the bull, they brought the boy to Eli. Sir, do you remember me? Hannah asked. I am the very woman who stood here several years ago praying to the Lord. I asked the Lord to give me this boy, and he has granted my request. Now I am giving him to the Lord, and he will belong to the Lord his whole life." And they worshiped the Lord there. Before Hannah even became pregnant, she worshiped the Lord. Before she had a son, she rejoiced. And when she weaned her son and left him, probably around age 3, in the care of a priest with wicked sons, she worshiped the Lord with a song. 1 Samuel 2, 1 and 2 is part of her prayer and her song. "My heart rejoices in the Lord. The Lord has made me strong. Now I have an answer for my enemies. I rejoice because you rescued me. No one is holy like the Lord. There is no one besides you. There is no rock like our God." I really can't imagine being a mom. I can't imagine taking my son and leaving him at around 3 years old with someone else to raise and say, "Here you go, God." I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that I would walk away in joy and in celebration. And I think about how courageous Hannah was and how truly her heart had been changed to be able to give him over to the Lord and trust, because now she's given away all her rights of, she doesn't have that firstborn son that eventually would take care of her again. She's leaving him there. She doesn't know that she'll have more kids eventually. And so what a courageous thing that she does. So many of the times we read this story and we think about, it's a story that shows us if we pray hard enough and with enough belief that God will give us what we desire. There's many nursery signs in Hobby Lobby that say, "For this child I prayed," or "For this child I prayed and the Lord has given me what I asked of him." But there's not a lot of signs that have the second part of the verse, which is, "And then I gave him back to the Lord. For his whole life, he will be given over to the Lord." Hannah did pray for a child, and she did receive her desired son, but it doesn't end there. After she received this precious gift, she gave the gift right back to the Lord. She consecrated her son, which means she set him apart for this special service to God. But what happens when our prayers don't get answered? I said in first service that when I was writing this, I didn't want to write this. I don't like to think about, when our prayers don't get answered, when the diagnosis stays the same. I don't like for people that sometimes the cradle remains empty. I don't like when people lose their jobs or lose their loved ones or lose their way. I don't like it. And sometimes we don't understand it. And so I think, how many of us have prayed prayers in desperation? My mom was in the hospital a little over 80 days. And when we learned that she would become a quadruple amputee after so many highs and lows, hopes and then disappointments, I remember sitting right back there one Sunday, and I remember sitting while everyone else was standing. And the rest of the congregation and the worship team was singing, "It is well with my soul." And I remember sitting down, and I remember just weeping. And I remember telling God, "It's not well with my soul. It doesn't feel well." And just praying and weeping and praying and weeping. And I remember, around that same time, why in the world we were doing a Bible study on James. And, chapter 1, consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds. And I remember saying, I'm not going to do that. I don't have joy in this trial. And I don't know if you've been there in that, soul-crushing type moments where you just feel so lost that you can't imagine your way back. But what I do know is that in my anguish, I decided not to push against God. Thank you, God, that I didn't. And I decided to lean into him. And that's not easy when you feel the weight of the world on your shoulders and you feel like, I know that you could take this away with just one word. But I leaned in. Probably the hardest I had ever leaned on God. Good thing he's got strong shoulders. My circumstances didn't change. The prognosis for my mom stayed the same. But my heart changed. It was slow and incremental, but it changed. He showed up for me and my family, and we witnessed it because we leaned in and we began to look for him. He hadn't left us, even though he answered our prayers a whole lot differently than we would have. But through it all, I've come to know God in such a deeper and more fulfilling way than I knew him before any of this trauma that we had to endure. So recently I heard this quote by Charles Spurgeon, and I wrote it down. I just loved it. It says, "I have learned to kiss the waves that throw me on the rock of ages." God has a sense of humor in this because I wrote, when I was preparing, I said, I don't like going through the storms of life and usually would prefer to stand on the shore. But I've learned that in these storms is when I am thrown against the rock of ages. And I can either cling to that rock or get swept back in the churning waves. And I say that God has a sense of humor because last night, my son had a soccer game, and it was about an hour and a half away. And so we were driving home, and it was 6:30 or something, I don't remember. And we're driving home, and all I see is black sky. I mean, it was so dark. I don't know if anybody was driving in it or if you just saw the rain at home, but it was black. And so I'm going, oh no, I hope we outrun this. And so I'm like gripping my steering wheel because I'm like, oh, it's coming. And so we're driving into it, and by the time we got to around Beechwood, it was so bad. I've got a tight grip, and we prayed in the car, like, all right, Lord, the wind is just like taking my big old SUV kind of all over the road. There's lightning going on like crazy. I can hardly see a couple cars in front of me. And so I'm like, ah. So it was fine. We got home, it was okay. We just had to get through it. So we get home, and I'm not home probably 5 minutes, I would say. And my dad calls me, and he was like, Sarah, you got to go outside because there's this beautiful rainbow. Did you guys see the rainbow last night? Yeah, some people saw a double rainbow, and they said how bright and brilliant and beautiful it was. My dad was like, it's to the east. You got to go see it. Well, I had just gotten home from a long day, and, I was still like this, and so I'm still like, oh, that was not a fun drive. And so I was like, all right, Dad, I'll go see it. Well, I didn't go see it, Dad. I kind of looked out my front door, and we have woods kind of on either side of us, and so I kind of looked out my front door. The funny thing is that I looked the wrong way. I looked to the west instead of the east. So I'm like, nope, don't see it. Duh. So I didn't really see it, but I'm like, that's all right. I've seen rainbows before. And then I get on Facebook later that night, and I see people's pictures. Mallory, yours was beautiful, and Jess, these pictures of this rainbow that's so bright and beautiful. I'm like, I missed it. I missed it. Because I was still like, about my day. And I had even said to my dad on the phone, like, yeah, I just went through the storm that produced that rainbow, like kind of joking. And then I get to this morning, I'm like, isn't that funny, God, that you would do that? We go through these storms, and sometimes we forget to look for the rainbow. Or sometimes we forget to, or we don't feel like it. And so we miss his faithfulness. We miss his working. We miss seeing what he's put really, really big, a big old sign in the sky. And we miss it sometimes. And sometimes we just miss it. Sometimes it's our fault, our choice. So this reminds me, though, all of Hannah's story, it reminds me of these verses. 2 Corinthians 4, 7-9, and 16-18. But we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not in despair. Persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. Since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. And just a funny note about that last section is I've had this thought about this verse of like outwardly we're wasting away. Anybody that's over 35, 40 knows that like outwardly we're starting to waste away. Like it seems like every week there's something new that's like, ow, I moved wrong and now I can't move my back. Like outwardly we're literally wasting away. But inwardly, we're being renewed day by day. And so I think of like our inner soul, our part of us that is going to be in eternity. And I think about how that's getting younger. Like that's getting more refined and beautiful and perfect. And what a cool picture that is like, you know, even though the outside is struggling, the inside can really be thriving. So this wasn't an immediate change for Hannah. She had to face years of barrenness and taunting from her rival. But when she was ready to give her desires over completely to God, he redeemed those years. God had become enough for her, even though her circumstances hadn't changed. Lamentations 3 says, "Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for him. The Lord is good to those whose hope is in him, to the one who seeks him. It is good to wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord." The Lord became Hannah's portion. A lot of times when the Bible talks about portion, it's in reference to an inheritance, security not only for this life, but eternity. Elkanah, in his love for his wife, tried to make himself Hannah's portion. Aren't I enough? Aren't I better than 10 sons? Hannah thought her portion was a family. And her and Elkanah tried to fulfill this in their own way, which led to disaster. It wasn't until Hannah realized that God was her portion and inheritance that her joy was complete. She had fullness of joy and no hindrance to her worship. She didn't need the security that a son would bring because she trusted God to take care of her. So if you have a prayer that you've been praying, maybe for days or weeks, years even, and you've been praying it in desperation, maybe it's been in sorrow and anguish or weeping, or maybe it's just even confusion or impatience. This could be a prayer that you have for yourself and what's going on in your own life. It could be a prayer that you have for a family member or a friend. If you have this prayer, is it time for you to get up, to face the Lord, and to pour out your heart? Psalm 73:26 says, "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." Psalm 16:5-6 says, "Lord, you alone are my portion and my cup. You make my lot secure. The boundary lines have fallen for me in pleasant places. Surely I have a delightful inheritance." I wonder if you would try praying through a new lens of God being your portion, the strength of your heart, the one who makes your way secure, the giver of compassionate love and daily new mercies, the faithful God who is good and provides us with hope. Would you try sitting quietly and waiting for him to bring a saving grace for your life? Remember that he holds your future and promises a beautiful inheritance to those who put their trust in him. Ask him to change your heart to align with his will. Ask him to teach you how to have joy while you wait on him. And I know that this isn't easy. We know that Hannah went through years of just deep anguish. I don't mean to say it lightly, of just get up, just start praying and it's going to get better. That's not necessarily the case. But if you would lean into him, if you would just trust him with the future. Hannah found the peace that only God can give, a peace that we can also have because Jesus said, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid. He gives us a peace that passes all understanding. It's not how the world might think it should all shake out, but it's a deep contentedness that no matter if your circumstances change or if they don't change, that you can change. Let's pray. God, I know that sometimes Mother's Day can bring just a mix of emotions. It's a time of celebration for those of us who had wonderful mothers, who felt loved and cared for. Sometimes it's a time of grief when someone hasn't become a mother yet and they long to. Sometimes it's sorrow when we miss mothers and grandmothers that have passed away. God, thank you that in all of it, that you hear our prayers, that you see our tears, that you see our joy and our just immense gratitude, like Nathan was saying earlier, just for maybe not necessarily our mom. Maybe it's a stepmom. Maybe it's a foster mom. Maybe it's an aunt or a grandma. Maybe it is a friend or a spiritual mother, someone who has shown us just that unending, compassionate love that you have for your children, and that has poured out of this woman. And so, God, I thank you for the women that you place in our lives. And God, I just pray for every woman here that they will just feel seen and loved by you. I pray for the men in our lives that they would be just men of God that would stand up and support their mothers and their daughters and their friends. And God, thank you that you hear us. Thank you for just new mercies every day, that when we one day we'll cry out in desperation, the next day we can rise up and just feel so strong in you. And so just thank you for holding us in both of those ways. And I love that song that Tommy sang earlier. We've been on both sides of being the 99 or the one, the thief or the child that's been sitting at the table the whole time. And just thank you for always just making a place for us and for loving us. We love you so much, Jesus. Amen.